Hello everyone. And welcome to something special. This is a collection of one-shots that show what would actually happen to Bakugo if My Hero Academia was remotely realistic. If you enjoy, please like, subscribe and share the video. I did not write these one-shots. The original writer is Fire/Shorts. Please support their work as much as possible. Now let's dive in. Authors note that I Blazing Story agree with, hi everyone, Fire/ here and welcome to this one-shot series. Now, you might be asking yourselves why I'm even writing this. Simply put, this is event FIC. While writing for my FIC Electro over on my main account, a FIC which I use to deconstruct canon, I found myself rewatching the anime/reading the manga with a critical eye. During this observation period, I found many faults with the series. Why I still write fanfiction for MHA is because I love the setting and several of the characters. Sadly, canon's lackluster in terms of storytelling and character development, which bothers me greatly. This is most obvious with one Katsuki Bakugo, who I consider to be one of the worst characters of all time and my least favorite character in general. If you really care why I hate Katsuki, I'll be posting my reasons once I hit a certain point in Electro, but do know that I have a 4K plus essay going over why I consider him to be a crappy character. This story's not for his fans, so if you like him, that's fine, but this is not the story for you. Anyways, if you've decided to stick around, there are some other stuff I wanted to say. Unless noted otherwise, these one-shots will not be related to one another. Assume canon up to where the one-shot takes place has happened. Well, I don't really have anything else to say, so let's get on to the first one-shot. Review and enjoy. That's it. I'm done. Izuku Midoriya thought to himself, the boy being alone in his middle school classroom, everyone else having already left. I'm done forgiving, done excusing the actions of others. Such thoughts would shock those who knew him. Izuku was known as the boy always willing to help others. He was the first to offer aid to someone, no matter who they were. He was the person who could see the positives in anyone and was willing to give people far more chances than they deserved. However, he was only human, and all humans had a breaking point. Today was his. What has happened to cause such a nice boy to reach his breaking point? Simply put, his life up till now has been a living hell. Why? Well, he was quirkless. In a world where 80% of the world has superhuman powers dubbed as quirks, it was natural that some would be more gifted than others. Those with powerful quirks practically ran the world while those with weaker quirks were for the most part content with serving their superiors. At least they weren't part of the 20% of the world which were born quirkless, such as Izuku. As Izuku knew, being quirkless was hell. Every day was a struggle for survival. Shortly after being diagnosed as quirkless, all his playground friends had left his side, instead choosing to use him as a target for practicing their quirks. People mocked his dream of being a hero due to him having no innate superpower. All he wanted was to save people with a smile. Was that so bad? Apparently it was. Everyone, from his fellow students to even his teachers, mocked, laughed, and bullied him. One person took it to the extreme though, that being Katsuki Bakugo, a boy whose quirk allowed him to create explosions by igniting his sweat. Once inseparable friends, when Katsuki's quirk developed, he became arrogant and cruel, using his power to inflict pain upon others. Katsuki always took his torment to psychopathic levels. Whereas other kids knocked the notebooks out of his hands and stole from him, Katsuki would burn his things. Where students would beat him up, Katsuki would burn him. He still had the burn marks to prove the other boy's violent nature. Katsuki also seemed to have an immense hatred for Izuku, as even though he had other victims, he was especially cruel to Izuku. It wasn't like he did this in private. Teachers would ignore Katsuki's crimes while other students would cheer him on. Most saw the other boy as a hero due to his strong quirk, so they were willing to ignore his behavior. Those who hated Katsuki didn't do anything, their fear of getting on the boy's bad side overpowering their hatred for him. Back when Izuku would try receiving aid from the teachers, he'd be met with the same responses. Stop making up rumors about you, classmate. It's only natural how rough he is with his quirk. You'd be the same if you had one, showing it off all the time. Quit your complaining already. Bakugo would never do such a thing. Eventually, Izuku began to stop asking for help. Well, that was part of the reason he stopped asking for help. The other reason was because, like everyone else, he excused the actions of the bully. Despite how cruel Katsuki was, Izuku saw him as a hero, or at least someone who could become a great hero. Katsuki was everything Izuku wasn't, gifted with a powerful quirk, confident, smart, talented, and a great fighter despite having no formal training. He possessed amazing battle instincts, and with some formal training, he could become an absolute beast in a fight. To Izuku, the fact that Katsuki was an outright evil person never clicked, for he only focused on the positives. He admired the boy so much that he just couldn't see how horrible of a person his idol actually was. This admiration was also why he never told his mom about the abuse he suffers on a day-to-day basis. Doing so would get Katsuki arrested and/or barred entry from attending any hero schools. Katsuki has a large crime record, assault and illegal quirk usage being the main things he could be incarcerated for. Deep down, Izuku knew that doing this would free him from the boy's constant torment, but he couldn't bring himself to crush the other boy's dreams. Izuku believed, or perhaps he hoped, that Katsuki could be a great hero, so who was he to prevent such a thing from happening? Thankfully, there was a part of the boy's subconscious that knew that he was being delusional. As such, he always had his phone audio record his days at school, each encounter captured. Whenever he got home, he'd store the files on the laptop his father got for him. He had no plans on using them, but it turns out that the bullying had worn him out more than he initially thought, for it only took one encounter for him finally snap. "Alright, as you all know, you're all now in middle school," Izuku's homeroom teacher stated. "Soon you'll be applying to schools which will help you become what you want to be in the future. You should all start thinking about what exactly you want to be, but who am I kidding? All of you are planning on becoming heroes, correct?" Upon saying that, most of the students began cheering in affirmation, some of them even displaying their quirks in a non-destructive manner. Izuku shakily raised his hand as well, though no one noticed. "Hey Teach, don't lump me into the same category as these crappy side characters," Katsuki stated, the boy being in Izuku's homeroom. "I'm off to be the best damn hero you've ever seen." "Ah, right, you've mentioned that you're applying to U.A, correct?" His teacher asked the boy, not to anyone's surprise seeing as how much he let this fact be known. U.A Academy was considered to be the best hero development school in Japan. The chances of anyone getting in were slim, yet this didn't seem to faze Katsuki, the boy having a smirk on his face. "Damn right I am, I even aced the mock test." Hardly anyone as young as Katsuki did well on the mock test, something the explosive boy clearly knew as his grin only seemed to grow bigger after his bragging. "Midoriya, aren't you planning to apply to U.A as well?" Of course the teacher would bring that something up. "Really? Isn't he quirkless? How does he possibly think he can get into U.A? One of his classmates asked, everyone else laughing. The only person who wasn't was Katsuki. "Deku," Katsuki growled, not liking the fact the boy was applying to the same school as him, Deku being a nickname the boy gave him out of mockery. Deku was a word meaning useless, and Katsuki latched onto it, using it to mock the boy for his lack of a quirk. All right, that's enough," the teacher stated to regain control of the class, though Izuku knew that if it wasn't for the fact that the bell was about to ring, they would have continued mocking him. Thankfully, the bell did end up ringing a few minutes later, causing everyone to flood outside the room. Glad that the day was over, the boy began to pack his things, only for someone to swipe one of his notebooks. "The fuck is this?" Katsuki asked out loud, making his victim nervously eye him as he had no idea what was going to happen. Well, he sort of did, but it didn't make him feel better. Hero Analysis for the Future 13? You really think this is going to help you? The Hero Analysis for the Future were a series of books Izuku had written analyzing the quirks of all potential and current pro-heroes. It was his way of finding out the strengths and weaknesses of those who had similar quirks. If he was going to be a quirkless hero, he knew such knowledge would be helpful. In the background, two boys snickered, them being followers of Katsuki despite the fact he simply saw them as extras. "Kaken," Izuku weakly said, referring to the nickname he gave the boy back when they were childhood friends. That book was his pride and joy, composed of years of work. It was one of the few things he was proud of. Please give it back." Ignoring the boy's pleas, Katsuki gave him a devilish smirk. "Listen here Deku, you should just give up trying to be a hero. You're fucking quirkless. You can't be a hero without power." Hearing this, Izuku secretly clenched his fist, unable to make eye contact with the other boy. He wanted to tell Katsuki that anyone could make a difference, no matter if they had unstable quirks or lacked one, but he couldn't. Katsuki intimidated him to no end. ****. Looking up, Izuku noticed that Katsuki had activated his quirk to burn his notebook before tossing it out a window. Not wanting to lose it, he stuck his head out of the window, desperately trying to see if he could find where it fell. Like I said, no amount of research is going to cover up your flaws, Katsuki told him as he continued searching. You know, if you really want to be a hero, take a swan dive off the roof. You'll be far more useful dead, and who knows? You might even get a quirk in your next life. Shatter. Izuku could have sworn that he heard something shatter. Suddenly, the boy's mind immediately began flashing back to all the times Katsuki had picked on him, and for once, he couldn't find himself able to defend his former friend. Was he always this bad? Izuku asked himself. Was I wrong all this time? His breathing increased as his body begged him to swing at the person who made it a struggle for him to live, to shout massive profanities at him and call him out for being such a villain to him. I was. No hero would treat others the way Kabakugo does. A real hero would use their quirk to help others, not beat them down. God, he's broken so many laws and has hurt so many people, he's no better than a villain. He was seriously about to allow himself to give in to his urges, but he ended up backing down when he noticed several small explosions coming from Katsuki's palm. Got something to say? TCH, you can't even defend yourself. Whatever, I'm done here. Watching the boys leave, Izuku clenched his fist, trying to hold back tears, upset that he was unable to stand up for himself. You don't deserve to be a hero. You'll only end up killing someone. Seriously, letting a psychopath like Katsuki be allowed to use his quirk to fight people will only lead to innocents dying. Sadly, Katsuki will get the chance to be a hero as their school has removed all evidence that he's done anything bad. The only hope he had was that whatever hero school he enters would expel him once they saw the real Katsuki. It was then that he had the ability to stop a mistake from being made. He had the recordings, all he needed to do was send them to the police and Katsuki would be punished. When Izuku returned home, he immediately began searching for the email address of the nearest police station and began typing out his email. To whomever this concerns, I have evidence of an individual, Katsuki Bakugo, using his quirk illegally and him assaulting others. I have attached audio recordings of these incidents. Katsuki Bakugo's quirk allows him to create explosions, hence why there are many explosions in the audio recordings. If you need anything else from me, please let me know. Thank you for your time. Izuku Midoriya. Attaching the recordings to his email, Izuku was about to send it, but remembered that he had even more evidence in the form of physical scars. Making his way to a mirror, he began taking pictures of all his scars and attached them to the email. Taking a deep breath in, the boy hit send. The deed was done, now was time to wait. 0000. Much to the boy's surprise, the police station responded immediately, with the lead detective asking him to come in for a testimony. Naturally, this meant he had to tell his mom about everything that has happened to him. Once he did, a lot of tears were shed that day. With his mom driving him to the police station, Izuku was seated in a private room, the detective walking in shortly after. Good morning Midoriya, the man said. My name's Naomasa Tsukachi. I just wanted to ask you some questions before we get to arresting Bakugo. I will also be recording our conversation for evidence. Just know that I have a quirk which allows me to tell if someone's telling the truth, so if I find out you were lying, you'll be in big trouble. Understand? Izuku nodded. While he wanted to ask the detective about his quirk, Izuku knew that there were more important things to be discussed. Turning on the voice recorder, Naomasa began to do his job. Alright. First question, were any of the evidence you've provided fabricated in any fashion? No sir. Truth. Seeing as the boy wasn't lying, Naomasa continued with his questions. Has your school been aware of Bakugo's treatment of you or any of his other crimes? No. The schools ignored it because they think he'll make a good hero. I'm also quirkless, so they ignored me. Truth. Naomasa didn't let it show, but he was absolutely disgusted with the school. I'll be investigating them for neglect after this, but let's focus on Bakugo for now. Was your mother aware of any of this? I never told her. For the longest time, I thought Bakugo would make for a good hero and I didn't want to ruin his dreams, but after he told me to kill myself, I ran out of patience. Truth. Naomasa nodded. Final question, but did you ever do anything to provoke Katsuki? While I'm more than certain you didn't, I need to be 100% sure. I don't think I did, Izuku said with a frown. I only tried to be his friend. Truth. Having no more questions to ask, Naomasa turned off the voice recording. Thank you for your cooperation. I know this must be hard for you, but you did the right thing. I promise you, we'll make sure that Bakugo and your school suffer the consequences for their misdeeds. Tears of joy spilled out of Izuku's face. Thank you, detective. Knock knock. I'm coming. Mitsuki Bakugo shouted as she made her way to the door. Opening it, she was greeted with the sight of Naomasa, his badge in his hand. Can I help you, officer? Ma'am, I'm not going to sugarcoat anything, Naomasa said. I have an arrest warrant for your son, Katsuki Bakugo, for illegal quirk usage and assault. To say Mitsuki was shocked was an understatement, for she simply stood still, jaw hanging open. Eventually, she got her act together. Let me get him. In the end, Katsuki was sentenced to 10 years in jail, with him just being old enough to be sent to prison, and was forced to undergo anger management therapy. Katsuki's parents were also forced to attend patronal classes as it was their negligence that allowed Katsuki to become the vile being he was. Finally, Izuku's middle school was closed down shortly after, with most of the faculty being charged for negligence and abuse. Izuku was allowed to finish his last year online. While Izuku initially wondered whether he did the right thing, he soon came around to accepting that he did, no longer regretting his decision. Life became much better for the young boy, with an encounter with a certain hero allowing him to achieve his dream and meet people who didn't take pleasure in beating him down. Second one-shot. Shota Aizawa, also known as the pro-hero Eraserhead, liked to consider himself an analytical and logical person. It was these skills that allowed him to excel at being an underground hero. Unlike most heroes who hogged the limelight, he didn't have a quirk that allowed him to solve most of his issues with brute force. His quirk, known as erasure, allowed him to erase the quirk of anyone he made eye contact with. There were limits to this, however, in that once he blinked, his quirk would stop suppressing the quirk of his opponent until he looked at them again. His quirk also didn't work on those with mutant quirks. Another weakness of his quirk was that it provided no offensive presence. Sneak attacks and his own hand-to-hand combat skills were what he had to rely on to beat his opponents. Such is where his analytical prowess comes in. He can't just rush in and begin fighting. He needs to plan out when the best time to strike was and figure out his opponent's capabilities in battle, whereas he fought them while adjusting his own style to counter that of his opponents. Shota also liked to believe that his analytical abilities applied to his day job. Unknown to most of the world, he was actually a teacher at U.A, being the homeroom teacher of Class 1A. As a teacher, he was harsh, but effective. He pushed his students to do their best, but made sure not to break them. Though he may deny it, he also paid attention to his students' emotional health and cared for them. However, what he was most known for at U.A is that he was willing to expel anyone he thought had no potential of being a hero. If a student was outright incompetent in a fight, lacked basic critical thinking skills, didn't have the attitude of a hero, or would simply a liability in the field, they were expelled. Every year, he used the quirk assessment exam he was forced to hold every year as a means of seeing which students he'd have to keep a critical eye on. Anyone he felt performed more poorly than they should or wasn't taking the exam seriously would be at risk of being expelled. Sometime he'd do so after the exam, or he'd give them one final chance to prove themselves. Such was the method of teaching he relied on throughout all of his years of teaching, and it was the style he was using this year. So far, his current class was generally competent. While there were some students who clearly needed improvement, they were all trying, and he was willing to work with them as long as they continued to try their hardest. However, there were some students that caught his eye, and not in a good way. First was Shoto Todoroki, son of the number 2 hero Endeavor. Though he was dominating the exam, he was only using half of his quirk. According to his files, he had the ability to produce fire and ice, but was only using his ice. Sure, his ice was more useful for most of the exams, but for the ball toss exam, he could have gotten a higher score by rocketing the ball with his flames. His files also mentioned that the only drawback of his quirk was that he could overheat his body or give himself immense frostbite if he overtaxed one half of himself, but he wouldn't do so if he used his quirk smartly. Still, the boy was creative and powerful, so he wasn't going to expel him. Second was Minoru Mineta, a boy whose quirk allowed him to create sticky balls from his head. Simply put, the boy's physical abilities were atrocious. Somehow he was scoring lower than the girl whose quirk only made her invisible. He was also potentially a sexual deviant based on how he was ogling the girls in his class. However, he seemed to be quite intelligent, scoring high on the sidestep test due to him creatively using his quirk as mini trampolines. He'll have to keep a close eye on the boy, but for now, as long as he doesn't act on his urges and commit sexual harassment or worse, he can stay. The third student was Katsuki Bakugo. The boy had a sharp mind and a killer quirk, but it didn't take a genius to see that the boy had several issues going on. First off was his aggressiveness. He'd yell at his classmates if they tried talking to him or got in his way, couldn't handle not being first in any of the exams, and gave off the vibes that he was extremely violent. It's only been an hour, but he's already threatened to kill 3 students. He also seemed to have an immense hatred for a specific student in particular, smiling whenever said student failed to get a high score on one of the tests. There was also another aspect of Katsuki that didn't sit well with Shota, his performance on the entrance exam. While he did get the highest score of the year, he did so by only gaining villain points. Now, Shota didn't think the entrance exam was a suitable way of determining if someone's ready to be a hero, as it catered to those with strong quirks, but the fact that Katsuki only scored villain points was something to look into, and look into he did. While his middle school reports claimed that he was a well-behaved and a model student, his behavior during the entrance exam proved otherwise. He ignored those who needed help, sometimes actively yelling at them to shut up or to get out of his way. Such clearly didn't match the reports that he received. As such, he was making sure to keep an extra critical eye on the blonde. The final student he had his eye on was Izuku Midoriya. Izuku was the opposite of Katsuki in regards to several things. First off, he only got in due to hero points, not scoring a single villain point. Shota was curious as to why this was, but according to the boy's files, his quirk actually developed during the entrance exam. He was a late bloomer who didn't know how to use his quirk. Such was evident seeing as he wasn't using his quirk for any of the exams. Secondly, the boy's files mention that he was a source of distraction for the other students at his middle school and was constantly misbehaving. He's yet to see any signs of an unruly child. If anything, the boy was incredibly shy and oddly hesitant to interact with his other classmates. However, the boy's lack of control over his quirk was a huge problem. As such, when the boy was about to break his arm by using it on the ball throwing exam, Shota cancelled his quirk. What happened? Izuku mumbled under his breath. I erased your quirk, Shota simply stated. It was then that something clicked inside the boy's head. Wait, you're the pro hero eraser head. The underground hero who can erase quirks by looking at them. It seems you did your homework. Shota had to admit, he was a bit impressed by how he was able to piece together who he was. Still, he had a job to do. You were going to break your arm again. I saw your little stunt with the 0-pointer and simply put, you'll only be a liability as you are now. Shota tossed the boy another ball. Find a way to control your quirk. Shota foresaw 2 things happening: either the boy figures out a way to somewhat control his quirk or he'll have to spend one-on-one time with him to figure out some way to help him. He wasn't going to expel Izuku yet. Immediately, Izuku began mumbling under his breath before his eyes widened. Pulling his arm back, the boy proceeded to toss the ball. Smash! The ball went sailing across the field. When it landed, he looked at his teacher, his pointer finger being completely purple, bruised from his finger bones breaking. I can still move, sensei. This kid. Shota had to admit, he was impressed, giving him an approving nod after showcasing his score of 700.3 meters to the class. Sure, Izuku was still hurting himself with his quirk, but breaking a finger was much better than breaking an arm. In addition, he managed to figure out a new way to use his quirk on the fly. DEKU. What the fuck was that? Katsuki shouted, using his quirk to launch himself at Izuku. Years of training kicking in, Shota immediately leapt into action, using his capture scarf to restrain Katsuki while erasing his quirk with his own. It was clear that if he hadn't intervened, Katsuki would have used his quirk on Izuku, something which was illegal unless done in combat training. Hey, what gives? The blonde shouted as he struggled with his restraints. I erased your quirk, Shota bluntly told him. Looking at Izuku, he noticed that the boy was frozen in primal fear. It didn't take a rocket scientist to figure out why this was. The two attended the same middle school, and as such, most likely had history with one another. Based on how Izuku was fearful of the other boy, it was clear that the relationship the two shared wasn't a good one. In fact, he was sure Izuku was a victim of bullying. Why else would he be so skittish? The reports of their middle school suggested that this wasn't the case, but Izuku was a late bloomer, meaning he was quirkless. It was entirely possible that their middle school was a perpetrator of quirk discrimination. Simply put, the school was willing to write good things about Katsuki due to his strong quirk while looking down on Izuku for his lack of one. It wasn't the first case Shoto's run into and it wouldn't be the last. It also made sense considering Katsuki's behavior during the entrance exam compared to Izuku's. Katsuki Bakugo was simply put, a bully, and bullies weren't heroes. Combined with having a large ego and clear anger issues, Katsuki was far from hero material, something he proved when he tried attacking Izuku just now. As such, Shota decided to do what was necessary. Bakugo, go get your things. You're expelled. The blonde's jaw hung open, unable to comprehend what he just heard. What? I watched your performance during the entrance exam and let me say, you were already on thin ice, Shota explained. You managed to score no hero points, and when presented with the opportunity to gain some, not only did you ignore it, but you verbally assaulted your fellow test-goers. Throughout the quirk exam, you've proven to be unreasonably aggressive, yelling at your fellow classmates for no reason. However, what you did just now was the final straw. You tried to attack Midoriya for no reason. That bastard shouldn't have a quirk. He's quirkless. Katsuki yelled in a feeble attempt to defend himself. Unless he's been looking down on me and hid it. It's called being a late bloomer, Shota said, giving the blonde an unimpressed look. And even if Midoriya was hiding his quirk for whatever reason, it does not give you a reason to attack him. Seeing as how quickly you were to resort to violence, I can tell that this isn't the first time you've used needless violence when dealing with others. The fact you were even willing to use your quirk is more concerning. It tells me that you're used to using your quirk illegally. It's clear you are not mentally fit for heroics, and as such, you are expelled. When Shota finished, Katsuki began to yell explicits while aiming to free himself from his restraints, unable to comprehend the fact that he was being denied his dream. Shaking his head, Shota faced the rest of his students. The rest of you are free to go. I did say I'd expel last place, but all of you seem to have some potential and I have something more important to deal with. Like Eraserhead had said, Katsuki was expelled from UA. Shota also asked Principal Nizu to conduct an investigation on Aldera Middle School for acts of quirk discrimination and quirkless discrimination. Despite Aldera's best attempts at hiding their acts, seeing as Nizu was one of the smartest beings in the world, their misdeeds were uncovered in only a few days. Aldera was forced to close down as a result, with most of the faculty members undergoing trial for discrimination and negligence. Nizu also managed to uncover video recordings of Katsuki using his quirk on not only Izuku, but on other students. As such, Katsuki was sentenced to 10 years in jail for assault and illegal quirk usage, with him just being old enough to be sent to prison. While in jail, he was forced to undergo anger management therapy. Izuku, still admiring Katsuki and blind to his misdeeds, tried to convince UA that Katsuki was heroic and that they should readmit Katsuki into the hero program, even claiming that it was his fault that the blonde was aggressive to him in the first place. His requests were naturally denied. Instead, Shota and Nizu had him undergo counseling sessions with Hound Dog, who helped Izuku realize that he didn't deserve any of what happened to him and that Katsuki was no better than a villain. With his newfound knowledge, Izuku was able to work on his confidence and on his dream of being a hero, his classmates and teachers supporting him. The symbol of peace, the current highest-ranking hero in the world, a hero who never gives up, and the man who always smiled in the face of danger, these traits were what people used to describe All Might. With all of these monikers under his belt, one would say All Might had no weaknesses. However, he wasn't flawless. This could easily be seen in his teaching capabilities. Sure, All Might was an extremely charismatic person, but his charisma came from his presence. When it came to words, he generally kept things brief and hopeful, with him simply being All Might, making it so that his words held much weight when he said them. Sadly, presence alone didn't make for a good teacher. When his successor, Izuku Midoriya, asked how to use his quirk, One for All Might's advice was to clench your butt and yell smash. It worked for him, so it should work for his protege, right? Well, Izuku ended up breaking 3 of his limbs when he tried what All Might taught him. As it turns out, All Might was simply a natural with One for All, not having struggled with the quirk. His body had been able to obtain the sheer power of the quirk from day one. Izuku's body is yet to be able to handle using One for All at goal power. With All Might not having had any issue with the quirk, he had no idea how to help Izuku control the quirk, so he was thankful when the boy managed to find a way to channel his quirk through his fingers rather than only his arm. All Might was great at many things, but teaching wasn't one of them. Even he can acknowledge that maybe he wasn't the right fit for a teaching position at UA, but here he was, about to start his teaching career at UA. Like all his challenges though, he was going to face it head-on. If he could beat All for One, then he could definitely teach some kids how to be a hero. They were counting on him, and he will do his best to help them succeed. If only he knew how disastrous his first day was going to be. The day started off simple enough. He greeted his students in a heroic manner and explained the training exercise flawlessly, save for the fact that he read off of note cards, but surely none of his students noticed, right? In hindsight, he should have started with the basics of combat training rather than throwing his students into battle simulations right off the bat. His reason for doing so was that heroes are often thrown in unfamiliar situations, but those heroes had at least some formal training under their belts. Either way, he began shuffling the teams. Once they were made, he began announcing the first match, which was Izuku and Ochako Uraraka versus Katsuki Bakugo and Tenya Ida. Giving both teams 10 minutes to set up, All Might began the match. 10 minutes are up. Hero team, you may now search for the bomb. All Might's voice boomed over the intercom. Giving one another a determined nod, the two entered the building. Upon doing so, both teams noticed how dark the place was, something they didn't like. Thankfully, they could still see their surroundings. Stopping briefly, Izuku turned all of his attention to his ears as he began scouting for any signs of activity. Not hearing anything, he gestured to Ochako that it was safe to move. The pair would continue to use this strategy, not running into danger for a few minutes. Unfortunately, all good things must end as Izuku's eyes suddenly widened in fear. Ochako was about to ask him what was wrong when he tackled her to the ground, a large explosion having gone off. Looking up, both teens saw Katsuki in all his glory staring at them, upset his shot had missed. With impressive speed, Izuku brought Ochako and herself back to their feet and gently pushed the girl the other way, letting her know this was where they split up. Though a bit hesitant, seeing her partner give her a shaky yet affirmative smile motivated Ochako to go. At this point, one of his students, Ejiro Kirishima, mentioned that sneak attacks were unmanly, to which All Might responded that villains often don't play fair and that in a battle between heroes and villains, dirty tactics were acceptable. You have quite the quirk there, Deku, Katsuki growled, edging closer to the boy. All Might knew the two had history, but he didn't know the full details. Supposedly Katsuki was someone Izuku admired, but All Might had to wonder why Izuku would admire him among all people. Katsuki was strong, but he was incredibly hostile and violent. Still, he knew why this match meant a lot for his successor. By beating Katsuki, Izuku would show the world that his dream to be a hero was obtainable. Out of instinct, Izuku put up his fists, taking up a fighting stance, irritating the blonde. TCH, you still fight, even when you're scared. You've been like that ever since we were kids, it's what I hate about you the most. Lunging forwards, Katsuki was about to launch an explosion at Izuku, only for the boy to grab his arm and judo throw him to the ground. Keikaken, you always start off with a right hook, Izuku explained. Even though his voice was laced with fear, there was also something else in there, a burning desire to succeed. I've always kept track of all heroes and potential heroes and that includes you. I won't be your punching bag anymore. From now on, Deku means, you can do it. This earned a snarl from his opponent. With a roar, he lunged forwards, ready to attack, only for Izuku to dodge again. The two continued their dance, Izuku not using his quirk. All Might knew why this was, seeing as Katsuki would die if hit by one for all at full power. Instead, Izuku was aiming to use the capture tape given out for the exercise to win. Unfortunately, Katsuki eventually caught wind of Izuku's strategy and got angry. Changing up his fighting style, Katsuki soon began dominating the fight. A pit began forming in All Might's stomach as he watched, and it took him a bit to figure out why. Katsuki was being overly aggressive, each of his strikes dealing what seemed to be unnecessary damage. It would only get worse from there. A light on one of Katsuki's gauntlets flashed red before the boy shot a feral smile towards his victim. I know you've been watching my gauntlets for a while, you damn nerd. They've been storing up my sweat and now that they're full, I can launch a supercharged explosion. As a teacher of the heroics department, All Might knew everything about his students' costumes, including Katsuki. Simply put, the boy could easily kill someone with a supercharged explosion, especially at the distance separating Izuku from the blonde. All Might had hoped his students had enough common sense to not use the lethal parts of their costumes, hence why he allowed his students to use all parts of their costumes, but Katsuki was proving him wrong. Young Bakugo, don't. You'll kill him. All Might was hoping that this would be enough to stop Katsuki from pulling the pin, but it did absolutely nothing. Not if he dodges. Without hesitation, Katsuki fired the explosion, knowing full well that he could kill Izuku. All Might held his breath as he scanned the monitors, desperately searching for any signs of life. When the flames dissipated, he saw Izuku's body. For a second, he assumed the worst, but when he saw him moving, he released the breath he was holding in. He thought he lost his successor. With Izuku still alive, All Might's traditional smile began dissipating, with an angry smile taking its place, one only All Might could pull off. Katsuki had just fired a lethal attack knowing fully well that Izuku could have died. Simply put, that was grounds for attempted murder, and attempted murderers weren't heroes. Sure, sometimes heroes killed villains, but they never pointed a lethal attack on civilians or allies. Only villains do so, and as of now, Katsuki was no different than a villain. Inexperienced teacher or not, he knew what he must do. The battle exercise is now over. Young Uraraka and young Ida, please bring young Midoriya to the infirmary. He's on the first floor. Young Bakugo, don't move. The rest of Class 1A shuddered. Never before have they seen All Might so angry before. Young Yaoyorozu. The girl in question, Momo Yaoyorozu, flinched upon hearing All Might's commanding voice. Could you make some handcuffs for me? He then turned towards his other students. Unfortunately, your classmate decided it was a good idea to fire a lethal explosion on one of your other classmates, knowing full well the consequences. As of today, he is no longer a hero in training, but an attempted murderer and will be dealt with appropriately. If any of you commit a similar act in the future, you will also be dealt with appropriately. Understood? Getting several nods and "yes sensei" from his students, All Might briskly made his way to the battleground. With his speed, he was able to do so in no time. Young Bakugo, put your arms behind your back, All Might commanded. You are being arrested for attempted second-degree murder. The fuck? Katsuki yelled, not believing what he was hearing. You fired an explosion knowing that it could have killed young Midoriya without remorse. That is attempted murder, no argument. As of now, you are a villain. Will you come peacefully or will you resist arrest? Katsuki was about to argue, but a twitch on All Might's furious expression was all that was needed to shut him up. As such, he allowed himself to be cuffed. In the end, Katsuki was sentenced to 10 years in jail, with him just being old enough to be sent to prison, and was forced to undergo anger management therapy. Izuku, still admiring Katsuki and blind to his misdeeds, tried to convince U.A that Katsuki was heroic and that they should readmit Katsuki into the hero program, even claiming that it was his fault that the blonde was aggressive to him in the first place. His requests were naturally denied. Instead, U.A had him undergo counseling sessions with Hound Dog, who helped Izuku realize that he didn't deserve any of what happened to him and that Katsuki was no better than a villain. With his newfound knowledge, Izuku was able to work on his confidence and on his dream of being a hero, his classmates and teachers supporting him. As for All Might, he used this chance to better his teaching skills so that another incident like this never happens again. Teaching ended up becoming something else he was good at. And that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, please like, subscribe, share and support the writer. See you in the next video.